I'm Sehaam Cyrene, and you are here for better conversations.
One of the things that I also believe in is the power of collaboration and not being afraid of asking for help and being vulnerable and showing that you actually are struggling with something. We all struggle with something. And I think that's really, really important for teams or for employees or colleagues to know that it's okay to struggle. It's okay to really ask for help. I mean, that's something that we all should do more often, probably including myself.
While we're gifted with speech, conversations, really good conversations, don't happen as much as we'd like. In this podcast, my guest and I deep dive into all the corners of what makes a conversation awkward and uncomfortable, or warming and memorable. My guest today is Lorenzo Espinosa. He works in tech. He's currently Director of Data Operations and Product at Chattermill, a London-based AI startup disrupting the unified customer experience analytics space, which basically means they analyze the feedback from your customers to give you insights that help you improve the experience, service, or product to your customer. Lorenzo has been innovating on products and platforms for companies like Amazon and American Express. He considers himself strategic in his thinking. He enjoys mentoring, and we can also add multicultural in his outlook. And from what I can tell so far, he's pretty switched on when it comes to understanding people and motivating teams, which in my experience tells me he's got a high degree of comfort with being open and vulnerable. I love guests like this. He's also an MBA graduate from London Business School. He's Spanish and has lived, worked, and studied in the US. He's also a half IRONMAN finisher in Boulder, Colorado, and has also run 2 world marathons, one in Chicago and one in Berlin. Let's get inside his head. Lorenzo, welcome.
Thank you for the intro, Sehaam. It's great to be here.
My pleasure. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, but maybe for context, could you share with us a little bit about your job, what you're doing at the moment?
So as you said, I work for a company called Chattermill in London. And basically what we do, we basically extract feedback or unify feedback from all different sources for our customers and understand what customers are saying, how they're feeling about the different brands, and also enable our clients to also understand the interactions with their customers. In my role, I lead a team of 10 people. So I lead the data operations team. So I have that direct line management over these 10 brilliant employees that I consider them one of the best teams in the world. And in addition to that, I also lead a couple of product initiatives on which I have indirect management responsibilities. So I do have that combined direct and indirect management responsibilities inside the company, which makes influencing others a lot more important.
Right, for sure. So also for the purpose of context, can you describe what a really good conversation looks like to you?
Absolutely. I think for me, when it comes to conversations, when I feel that I have had a good conversation is when I feel that both parties or however many parties are taking part in that conversation can be open, can be honest, can express themselves without any sort of fear of being judged, of being wrong, of being called on or called out if something they said is not appropriate. It's just that openness and that ability to really get your point across without, having to sort of measure your words and having to sort of monitor how you project yourself, all those things. To me, a good conversation is one where you can really be open and honest about what you're saying, about what you're feeling, about how you're seeing things on your end, so that the other person understands what you're saying and how and what you have to communicate and the purpose you're trying to accomplish with that conversation.
Mm. And we'll get into that a lot more, because I'd be really interested to understand how you make that happen, what your contribution to that is. So you mentioned earlier you have your own team, and then you have other people in the organization where you need to be able to influence. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So as part of my role, I lead a team of 10 people. So my role heavily involves heavily data and technical pieces and coordination, and being the intersection of technology and commercial requirements, and always having to pivot across those two sections. But at the same time, being always pivoting between short term and long term. So always having the execution hat on, but also the strategic thinking. So it's almost like you're executing on something while you're also thinking about how to improve, how to change, how to iterate, how to scale the operations or the product or the initiative or the research that comes from the AI side of things. So it's always having that sort of multi-stage approach in everything I do. So when it comes to leading my team, I think one of the key things that has worked for me and that I think it's really important is to get to know them. When I first joined the company, I spent time getting to know them, trying to understand their motivations, things they wanted to do in their lives, things that they were not enjoying either at the company or they had not enjoyed in the past, things that worked well with managers, for example, or things that really, they just didn't want to happen again, or just simple things, just, how they like to receive feedback. So understanding them first allowed me to basically tailor my approach to each one of them and their progressions, and almost pair that with the company objectives so that, we always row in the same direction. When it comes to the indirect management, which is the product side of things, for people who may not be familiar with the field of product management, it's nothing else than being the advocate for the customer and having that customer hat on inside the company and being the intersection of business, technology, and sales or commercial. So, and UX, user experience. So not having direct responsibility when it comes to data scientists or engineers forces me to have to wear a different hat, which is that hat of getting my point across or getting my requirements across, my message, without the authority that comes with that position of responsibility, which is something I'll get into later. My views on authority, but is completely different. The approach is much more of a cross-functional approach. You have to understand how the others in other teams work, liaise with the other team leads, liaise with the customer. It's about getting that cohesive picture or coherent picture about what you all need to do and establish priorities. In a nutshell, or in a sense, is the same thing across those two, sort of these direct responsibility or direct line management responsibility versus indirect. But the approach is slightly different. But I do enjoy both.
Wearing a different hat, speaking a different language in terms of either visual or tangible or in ways that people can relate, right?
Exactly. It's all about understanding what works best for each conversation. No two conversations are the same because of so many different factors that can span from just the person you're talking to, but also the situation you're in your life, with a company, with a product. So there are so many variables that you have to take several approaches to each one of your projects, your interactions. And that's has been a huge learning for me. It's something that I really, really enjoy.
Right. Well, I was going to ask, how do you get all that information from an individual in your team? Do you see it as something that happens and that you learn about the individual over time, or is it more of a concerted initiative or effort on your part?
I'd say it's a bit of both. As I mentioned, when I started, I made a deliberate effort to really get to know them. So I came up with a set of questions that I wanted to pose. But before I really engaged in that conversation, I mentioned to each one of them what I believed in from a management point of view. So things that I believe in is I'll be there for them if they make a mistake. So I'm always willing to provide that safe space for them to try new things, to experiment, but also to really challenge me as well. I like to be challenged. I know I don't know everything by any stretch of the imagination. So always complementing my blind spots with views that they may have. Second, one of the things that I also believe in is the power of collaboration and not being afraid of asking for help and being vulnerable and showing that you actually are struggling with something. We all struggle with something. And I think that's really, really important for teams or for employees or colleagues to know that it's okay to struggle. It's okay to really ask for help. I mean, that's something that we all should do more often, probably including myself. And thirdly, it's all about establishing a relationship that also extends in the long run. So it's not just about that conversation. That initial conversation with my team that I had was great to basically lower that barrier or get us to know each other. But what really, really helped me or is helping me is getting to know them a bit better every single day, know how they are doing on a weekly basis, establishing those bonds, charting paths of progression for them, understanding where they want to go, understanding where they don't want to go. Those things really, really help me create a high-performing team. And I do think that those things are really, really important when it comes to getting employee buy-in, getting a team behind an idea, getting, in effect, getting a successful business really growing and growing fast as Chattermill is doing. The first thing is obviously the team. It doesn't matter how good your product is. It doesn't matter how big your market is. You need the team. You need a team to build the product. You need a team to sell your product. You need a team with the right culture to really make things happen. And the only way that can happen is you start with the team first and put them first at all times.
Wow. It feels like you've done my course, Lorenzo. It feels like you've spent a lot of time understanding this space and possibly even just have a natural interest in humans in that way.
I'd say it's probably, a combination of both again. I have spent some time, obviously, as part of the MBA that helped me a lot in terms of the theory and the academics. I've read quite a few management books, more than I'd like to admit. But then, obviously, the theory without practice is it's not useless. But you need to apply those concepts, right? And the only way you can apply those concepts is to actually engage in conversations, is to actually trying to understand people, trying to make yourself understood, iterating on your areas of opportunities, which we all have. And again, that's okay because we're all humans. So almost like taking that step back and realizing that, like we're all humans, we're all talking all the time. We should not be afraid of having conversations, be it in the workplace, be it with our families. It's really all about really opening up to others.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think we make a lot. More established companies have a harder problem, but I think also startups potentially fall into the trap of having a certain culture or structure and so on that actually stifles that kind of interaction and that exchange. So let me ask you this, a little bit putting you on the spot here.
Sure.
I'm wondering how your practice is going. So what would your team members be saying about you when they hear this?
Well, that's a tricky question. Yeah, you really are putting me on the spot. I mean, obviously, the main thing that I like them or that I think they would say is that I'm there for them. And that is probably one of the main things that, in my opinion, a good manager, a good leader should do. always have that approach of being available for your team when they need you. And also, I think they'd say that I care about their progression. I care about them, that I care about really them as individuals, but also as a team and how they work together. Again, like to me, that's the second pillar of good management. It's almost like that transformational leadership style paired with that servant leadership style, I'm going to call it, to make sure that they really have all they need to thrive by themselves. Obviously, management is not about hand-holding people, and I don't think it should be. It's just about actually the opposite, empowering people to grow and make mistakes, and saying that mistakes are okay, and that's how we all learn. That's how masters started. So I think that's probably those are the two things that I would like them to say, hopefully.
Well, I'd be very happy with that if that was the feedback that I got. So I think you're talking about emotional connection. You're talking about empowering people to understand themselves better, understand their options, realize they have choice in in their decisions.
Absolutely,
and how they respond to situations. And absolutely, through mistakes is growth. And I tend to talk about it as experimentation. You've got to experiment and find out what works for you, in whether it's in your conversations or your approach to your interactions with people, because partly it's easier. It's an easier sort of concept than a mistake. Experimentation feels more fun, more less binding in terms of what it expects of us. So I'd like to just go back a little bit and learn, who do you think has influenced? You said you've read a lot of management books, you've done an MBA. Beyond that, who's influenced your style of conversation?
I think it's been I've been heavily influenced by previous managers as well. It's almost like I've tried to borrow from my managers in the past what I've really liked, something that I like that they did about me, that they said to me, that they showed me. That's how I've been learning, also observing other people's approach, but also understanding what I don't like or wouldn't like someone to say to me, or to just to say or approach, or just eat the different things that potentially I just didn't like. But then, in addition to that, one of the things, back to your point about experimentation, that has been my whole career. I guess it's been about experimentation and really figuring things out, coming from a place where I didn't know what the next step in my path was going to be. So as you said, I'm from Spain. I'm from a, I guess, medium-sized town in Spain. And 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, I could not imagine that I would be speaking with you today about this topic, having done the things that I've done. And the way I've done that experimentation has been by asking a lot of questions and relying on mentors. And mentorship is, for me, a key piece of good conversations, of understanding what's available to you out there, understanding what other paths may be open to you in a few years down the line. Basically, what happened to me is that I didn't know what I didn't know. And obviously that happens to all of us. So from moving to the US, to finding my first job in the US, a foreign market to me, to progressing inside the companies I worked for in the US, to relocating to the UK and getting admitted into London Business School, to finding my role at Chattermill, to really progressing as a leader or as a director within Chattermill. That's experimentation all along. And the only way I've been able to learn or know at least how to proceed, or what the next step was to actually relying on mentors and ask questions. So to me, that's shaped me tremendously, knowing that I could learn from all these people, and almost like having this board of mentors that could help me figure out where I was getting stuck, could help me think through the way I was having my conversations, the way I was feeling about my conversations, the way I was going to approach a particular crucial conversation, let's say. These people really shaped me. It's almost like the aggregation of all these learnings is what I use on a daily basis. And yeah, and that's my plan for the future as well. And I really recommend all the listeners to really understand or grasp the power of mentorship. And really, it doesn't have to be very formal, doesn't have to be, very official. It just can be someone you trust at work, or someone you trust from like a previous colleague, a confidant, let's say, to really express yourself or communicate what you're struggling with. And that person can really help you move to the next step, or just ask questions that will help you figure out the next step yourself. It's just about really, again, communicating.
I really love that, the expression you used of board of mentors. Like any company would have a board of advisors, right? I think that's very wise counsel indeed. Do you think people, are you aware? I'm interested in your sort of perspective, whether you feel like people understand that, or whether people could, there's room for people to actually do a lot more in terms of collecting mentors to help them with their careers. Do you think that's something that doesn't happen enough?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think for whatever reason, sometimes it's because we are just not confident enough to ask someone to become our mentor, because sometimes we just don't know or are not familiar with the concept of mentorship, or we never really thought about it. We put our lives, our careers on autopilot in a way, and we let sort of life guide us. And I think that's something that mentorship can help us with, because we need to have a purpose with our careers. We need to be proactive. We need to be diligent about the things that we're learning, about the next steps we take, about how we approach certain situations. And obviously, what I mentioned earlier is that we don't know what we don't know. And if you want to get from A to B, how else can you do it other than asking someone who's gone from A to B already, other than, finding a lot of roadblocks and potentially struggling more than you should? The easiest, in my opinion, the easiest way is like, all right, if I want to go from A to B, why don't I try to network, to connect, to meet someone who's been from A to B or a similar path, who can really advise me on how to best get there, and also the pitfalls of his or her journey getting from A to B. So yeah, I fully agree with your statement that there is a lot more to be done in the space of mentorship. Obviously, there's a combination of us as individuals being more proactive about finding mentors, or potentially becoming more familiar with the concept of mentorship, but also businesses or companies really pushing that concept of mentorship inside their organizations, and really encouraging people to really get out there and expand their horizons,
or making it part of the way things are within their organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's a great deal of room in that. But to me, it speaks to conversations that you have. And for you, what I heard you say is, it helped you make some decisions or figure out the quickest way of doing things. Can you give us a flavor of what a conversation with one of your mentors sounded like? I mean, in terms of how did you start the conversation? What were your questions to them? What were you trying to resolve?
Sure. Absolutely. I think that's a great question. One example would be, there was a point in I guess 3 years ago where I was trying to decide whether I should stay in the US, whether I should come back to Europe, whether I should get into other fields other than potentially product management, or pursue a different career. Basically, these questions that come up all the time in our in our lives. Should I switch careers? What's my next step? How am I thinking about my next role, my next 3 roles? Who am I going to be in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years? And that's something that goes through my mind quite a bit, potentially too often. Like, who am I going to be in 10 years? What am I going to learn? What is the path for me to get there? And basically, the conversation with one of my mentors was very enlightening, because he was like, all right, Lorenzo, hold on, stop, just breathe. And that alone helped me quite a bit, because basically his point was that when I was expressing myself, when I was trying to tell him, these are the things that go through my head, these are all the worries that I have, these are the all the different paths that I could take. It's like, how am I gonna choose from all this? Like, it's impossible. And I was getting super anxious about it in a way. And he was like, just breathe. Like, just take a step back and reflect on what you've done, what's gotten you here, what's really in you, who you are as a person. And he made me realize by asking these questions who I was as a person, or what my qualities were. And I came to realize that as a person, I had been able to go through a lot of change, to switch contexts tremendously from one role to the next, from one country to the other, from one education system to the other, from different management styles across managers that I had until that point. So basically, he helped me understand that change had been the only constant in my life. And that was one of the main strengths that I had as a person, that ambiguity was something that I actually sought, and that something that I actually enjoyed in a way, even though it can feel a bit counterintuitive. But just by asking me these questions, he actually then say what I had to do. He actually then tell me, you actually need to choose this path because A, B, and C. He just asked questions and remained silent for most of the conversation, to force me to speak up, to force me to think, to really express my thoughts. Because we all try to be sometimes super structured. We just want to say the right things, but sometimes we just need to say it all out and not vent, but really get it all out there, and then take what makes sense of it all. And that's how I came to that conclusion. And from then on, is like, all right, now I know then I can take a step back, reflect on what I have done until this point, and potentially, yes, I can put a plan together based on the things that I've done, and that also I can ask more targeted questions instead of what do I do with my life? So that conversation was particularly useful for me, and the only way I got to that conclusion was because this person had actually experienced the same exact thing 15 years earlier when he was my age. So that's my point from about someone who's gone from A to B. It's like that person can definitely advise and put things in perspective for you much better than you can, and much faster than you can. And to be honest, most mentors are very, very happy to help and pay it forward because somebody else helped them in the past. And that's what I try to do as well.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a great example of mentorship in action. The holding the space, the asking questions, the recognizing your emotions in all of that, and really getting you to think more deeply and reflect in a useful way, I think is incredibly helpful. And moves things forward, right? You're not getting stuck in the discussion. You're not in a loop and unable to get out of it or make sense of it. So fascinating. We're going to take a quick break.
Better conversations. We all want to have them at work. Have you ever felt dread about an upcoming chat with a colleague you needed to have, or had that sinking feeling when that meeting didn't go as well as you hoped? When we can provide a safe space in conversation, the other person feels able to open up without fear. As leaders, part of helping our team do their job effectively is to motivate and guide our people to deliver on their goals. And when we have successful conversations, we become more influential, encourage deeper collaborations, and foster true connection at work. Did you know it's the #1 skill that sets the top leaders apart from the rest? That's why we've created a 12-week online course hosted by executive coach Sehaam Cyrene, helping you to navigate those tough conversations with skill and compassion. Enroll today at leaderswhocoach.today.
Okay, so we've explored your journey so far in terms of the work that you're doing and how you're leading your teams and how you're influencing people. I wonder if you could share with us what maybe has been your best and worst conversation.
Absolutely. Happy to. So I think, I'll definitely start with my best conversation, or conversations, I should say. I think when I reflect about this, and I've done it for a while, I think the best conversations that I've had were with my father, who unfortunately is no longer with us. During his last months, he really, really taught me a lot of good, amazing, I should say, life lessons that I still live by today. The concept of putting the family first at all times. That's something that we tend to forget quite often. Or when I say family, I say loved ones or friends. We tend to forget about it quite often because we are so stressed about work. We just forget about, the things that truly matter. And it was, during his last months, unfortunately, that he started reflecting about this, and we started talking more openly about these sort of crucial aspects of life that we really don't think about. And the realization that we have to put things in perspective and really, again, take that step back a lot more often than we do. And, just be happy with what we have, with the people that love us, the things that we've been able to accomplish. Really take stock of all the good things that really happened, or that are happening to us on a weekly or monthly or annual basis, or during our lives to date. He really taught me quite a few things, and what's more important is that for some reason we started to connect even more. So he mentioned things that he had been, or thoughts that he had been having for a number of years, but he had not disclosed to me for whatever reason. So it was not until that time that he made himself vulnerable in a way to me. And I think that was, I felt it was a moment of pride for my father, because, he really, in that difficult moment, he really made himself vulnerable. And thanks to that, he taught me all these life lessons, and I cherish them to this date. And that's something I'll always be thankful for. And yeah, my message here is really to avoid something bad happened. It can be obviously illnesses, it can be anything, but we shouldn't have to wait for something bad to happen for us to take stock of all the good things that we have. And that's something I try to reinforce in all my conversations, in all, to my team as well. Like, realize that, yes, we are trying to build a successful business. We're trying to be the best we can be. But at the same time, we just need to enjoy, our family, our friends, our work, anything that we do, right? And that's something that's really important to realize. And one last thing that, another big thing that my father told me or taught me during those last months is that the importance of always taking the next step. It doesn't matter how hard everything may be or the difficulties you may face, you have to take the next step. And there is no way to figure it out. You just have to take that next step and then take the next one and take the next one and take the next one. And that grit, that resilience, or seeing that in him, and the way he expressed that during those difficult moments really changed me. in a way. So that's why I'd say those were the best conversations I had.
Wow, very precious time, and an awareness in himself about the priorities for him.
Absolutely. And as I said, that's something that he taught me. He taught my sister. I'll teach my kids. I try to teach my team. Again, like almost passing on that lesson is the best way to really make sure that.
I'm curious, in our work conversations, do you think we lose sight of that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that happens quite a bit because, again, we don't want to make ourselves vulnerable. Obviously, that is a very deep conversation I just mentioned, and not all of us are comfortable sharing that with our work colleagues, and that's completely okay, of course. But there are certain levels or certain degrees of how we could make ourselves a bit more vulnerable to just ask for help or just say things that are not working or be open about issues that we're having. I think sometimes we are not upfront enough because we don't want to upset our manager, let's say, or we don't want to really get it wrong. But actually, there is a lot of value in this agreement. And as long as you provide constructive feedback, as long as you attack the problem, not the person, it'll always be valuable. And you'll always walk away with something that will make things better just by discussing the problem, discussing what's going on, being open about different angles of or points of view, being open about solutions, and again, agreeing to disagreeing. But then once you've reached a solution or a potential next step, just try to get behind that next step, take that next step, get together, iterate, express yourself openly again. Those are the things that really make innovation work. That concept of iteration, of continuous learning, of failing fast, and almost like the view that failure is, as you said, is nothing but experimentation, and failure should be actually encouraged in a way. The concept of failing fast, because that's how we learn. That's how we experiment. That's how we inform our decision making. If we don't have those conversations, we will always have these silos of information, these underlying problems that hinder the growth of organizations by just not communicating. And that's what it all comes down to.
Well, there's lots in there that you touched on that I think is really valuable. One of the things that you said there about, having a robust discussion about it. And even if you can't come to an agreement, there has to be a point at which you make a decision. And then all parties, having expressed their concerns, that due diligence, if you like, we then need to get behind the idea that's decided on, even if we don't agree with it 100%.
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the core concepts and behind some of the Amazon, for example. Take Amazon. That's a core value in the way they approach things. This commitment to an approach once something has been decided. We're gonna all get behind that approach. We've expressed our views. We may not have consensus, but we've decided that based on whatever metrics, data, strategic merits, this path is the best path we can take at this point in time. And we all get behind that path and we row as one team. And as I said, yes, we can revalidate, we can iterate, we can change it, we can completely, scrap it on the web after all. But yeah, it's something that is important to do.
Well, and that's only possible when you've got really strong emotional connections between team members who feel comfortable enough to express their point of view.
Absolutely.
That takes intentional conversations on the part of team leads and leaders within an organization to be able to make it possible for teams to exchange, have different ideas, but then be able to bring everyone back together. And, that's trust and respect and an ability to move past your own idea or your attachment to a particular way of doing something, right?
Absolutely. I think it's almost like it needs to be part of the culture, right? Most companies are defined by what we call values. Our values are just a way of putting our culture, trying to define a culture in words, always sometimes a bit more successful than others, because it's actually quite hard to put culture in words. But that is exactly what successful companies do. They foster that environment to be open, to really communicate, to challenge each other, to avoid that sort of group thinking concept, which is just agreeing with what the person sitting right next to you is saying, just so that you're not seen as the one who got it wrong, and almost like fear, like being afraid of being punished because you might have gotten it wrong. That if we take the complete opposite approach, and obviously fostered from the top, that's how people get empowered. That's how people adopt this concept of growth mindset, which is something I really, really believe in, which basically says that we are here to learn. We're able to learn anything. We have the capabilities in us to really learn anything that we want to learn, or anything that we want to do. Is like, trying to fight that concept of I'm not good at math, therefore I cannot become a physicist, or I had never been good at playing football, therefore I cannot go do something athletic. So it's almost like not being constrained by something you haven't been able to do in the past, or not being able to accomplish. It's just almost like get rid of all those thoughts, which are sort of your inner thoughts, and adopt that concept of it's okay to get it wrong the first time. Just keep at it, keep growing, keep learning. We all started somewhere, and that's how we all grow. So yeah, that's why I like growth mindset so much.
Yeah, it's where great stuff happens, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we don't know what we don't know. So I've mentioned that quite a few times because I think it's really relevant for the topic of conversations. And the only way of knowing what we don't know is just talking to people and exploring, experimenting, and trying things out.
Yeah, possibilities are waiting to be discovered, and you're not going to know unless you're in that conversation, for sure. So tell me about your worst conversation.
My worst conversation, or conversations, is actually conversations I have with myself, or I have had with myself. And this is related to the point I made earlier about listening, or not being realistic, or not being mindful or self-aware of everything you've done. When I've felt stressed or anxious, it's been because I've almost like I was telling myself that potentially I was not good enough, or that I had not done something perfectly. And I was like having that perfectionist approach, or that I had failed at something. Obviously, I've tried to improve on this, and I must make myself vulnerable here as well, and say that I don't have the solution to this. This still happens to me at times, that I have to sort of battle my inner thoughts. But I think that happens to all of us. And I think we do need to normalize that, and I can be okay with it. It's something that really takes some time from me to really, again, being more self-aware, like get outside of my head and say, hey, slow down. It's okay. Like, you don't need to be thinking about all these things that are going to happen, that may happen, 3-4 months down the line, or that may not happen at all. So one thing that I'm trying to practice, or trying to do to improve on this is something that I use quite often. And I've mentioned this to my team and to my friends, is the 10-10-10 rule, which is when you're worrying about something, or the conversation I'm having in my head with myself, or telling me that I haven't done something well enough, or that I should have known better. It's like thinking about that exact thought that you have at that point in time, and try to put yourself 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years from now. Obviously, in 10 minutes or 10 days, you potentially remember about that, and you'll be okay. Yeah, well, I actually really messed up, or I actually, this concept of dwelling on your mistakes too often. But then in 10 months, yeah, you may remember about it, but I'm pretty sure you'll be over it. And then in 10 years, I almost can guarantee that in 90% of the mistakes we make, those will be forgotten and we won't remember anything about them. So it's like, what's the point? And really, getting that long-term view helps a lot, really. It really helps to stop worrying about the now and thinking about the things that really matter. So if I would advise listeners to use that 10-10-10 rule, because it's really useful and something that is very simple, that takes 2 seconds. It's just a thought, but it really helps.
It's a great tip. And I guess in the absence of maybe having someone in that moment to talk through, like a mentor or a friend, it's a good way of putting things into perspective, right? And reframing how big a deal it is.
Exactly. And as I said, most things that, or most problems that we think we have, and I'm not trying to reduce the severity of some of the problems that we may be having. That's not my point at all. But with some of the problems that we have, if we truly think about how important they may be in 10 years, some of them will realize that actually are not that important or will not be that important. And, we can move on right there and then. Like that is that thought gone. Now on to the next one. And over time you get better at it. And that's something that we all need to work on. And that's something that allows me to have better conversations with myself.
Yeah, for sure. It reminds me of just that sense, the feeling that we have when we're beating ourselves up over something that didn't happen the way we would have liked it to. There's a sting in it, isn't there? There's a sense of frustration, shame, grief, disappointment. And those are really unhelpful. I mean, they're helpful to an extent if it's something that you don't want to happen again, right? It's a memory, an emotional memory of something. But being in that headspace is really counterproductive. It can't, we can't engage our brain in more helpful thought processes while we're stuck in this sort of self-flagellation of, I did the wrong thing. I made a mistake. I messed up.
Yes. And that happens to all of us on a daily basis.
Right.
So that's it's interesting how normal it is to feel that way, but then how uncommon it is to do something about it, or to be able to actually, really get outside of your head a bit and yeah, as you say, like really have the headspace to think about potential solutions to the problems that we have, which obviously it's what it's all about.
Yeah, because it's uncomfortable. It's it's not something you share publicly because you don't want other people to remember
exactly
that mistake, or to remember you as as that person who did whatever. So yeah, well, I'm sure there's more that we could talk about there. There's a couple of things that you've touched on that I wanted. Well, one thing you've touched on, and one thing I would like to ask you about. One is you mentioned at the very beginning about authority. And I have a question around, having lived in and grown up in Spain, lived in the States, and now you're in the UK. Whether you notice any sort of cultural differences in conversation styles? So which one would you like to tackle first?
I kind of start with the cultural differences and then move on to authority, which is potentially, authority sort of is related to cultural differences as well. So yeah, definitely. I think having lived abroad and having experienced several cultures, I can definitely see differences in the way we approach conversations, the way we think about conversations, and how comfortable we are with certain conversations. I think it's crucial to be mindful about the differences in cultures when it comes to communication. So, for example, in the US, obviously, people are very direct, and also the hierarchy structure is very flat. Is much flatter than in Spain, for example. In Spain, there is a bit more hierarchy and more formal structure, or the way you have to talk to or address a VP, a CEO things are changing, but it used to be that way, that it was a bit more formal. So definitely the way conversations work are so different from Spain to the US, to the UK. And there is so many studies, so many books about this. I'd recommend one in particular that is called The Culture Map. That really helped me understand the way I was feeling or perceiving how others were receiving my communication and why that was. And obviously, not only in these two countries that I mentioned, but when you travel around, you also understand why people approach other people in the way they do, because culture is what defines us, right? We cannot remove our cultural upbringing from who we are, because that's part of who we are. So therefore, understanding the differences, the nuances, is also another tool in our toolkit to be able to have better conversations, to be able to understand each other, to be able to know how to address certain people in certain situations. Because obviously culture is just one piece, but culture defines, potentially how open we may be about our personal issues, how open we may be our mental health. Those things are to an extent defined by culture, but also they are closely interrelated to the conversations we may have in different settings. So yeah, I'd say conversations are heavily defined and influenced by different cultural values and cultural nuances from different geographies in the world. Which brings me to authority, and authority is an interesting concept and something that I've always been fascinated about, or the concept of power and authority and how to lead others with and without authority. And I think one of the things that really struck me when I was learning more about leadership and management was these two concepts, sort of this transactional leadership versus transformational leadership. And transactional leadership just focuses on the now, on that process, on getting something done. And that's when you tend to use authority a bit more. If you're in a position of power, you're the CEO, you're a senior person in a company, you're leading a team, and you really use your authority. Hey, I want you to do this now. That is potentially needed at times. However, we cannot always do that. We cannot bring the hammer down all the time. We cannot forget about our team and that there are people who are really trying to do their best. And if we lead with authority in a bad way all the time, that will backfire on us. Maybe right there and then, but most certainly in a few months or sometime down the line, because people respond to trust, and people respond to not being trusted, and always leading with authority, as in not trusting people with their work, always hand-holding them, always telling them exactly what they have to do, always avoiding any sort of mistakes or seeing, being punished in some sort of way for those mistakes. That fosters an environment where of fear, in a way, in people, where people really do not open up, people do not contribute, people do not care about improving things, because there's just, if I'm going to be told what to do, what do I care? So let's think about the opposite way of doing things, not the opposite, but an alternative way of doing things, which is transformational leadership. Well, yes, you may be in a position of power. However, it's all about how you use that power to change others. When we think about a manager or a person who's touched us, it's because that person has changed us as an individual, or that person has allowed us to really go one step beyond where we thought we might be able to get. And that is the true power of authority, as in the true power of being in power, is that empowerment and that ability to change people. And that is what's truly, truly fascinating, that you can come in, understand motivations, understand goals, provide objectives, establish bonds, and then really create a high-performing team by just letting people be themselves. And that's the key here. Like, you just let people be themselves. You just let them try things. You just let them really experiment and inform and contribute, and they'll respond. Because when we're trusted, we care more about what we do. We really are willing to go above and beyond for our team, for our teammates, because we all know that we're going the same direction. And that, to me, is the true concept of, or how authority should be used, in my opinion, when we think about conversations, empowering, growing organizations, creating better cultures. That concept of empowering your teams or transforming your teams, transforming individuals. To me, that is the really, really fascinating piece about it.
Yes, absolutely. I have nothing more to add, Lorenzo, to that. That was very heartwarming to hear. And I'm completely aligned to your way of thinking on that. It strikes me that there's creativity in that, and creativity only can breathe and live where, the environment is conducive to that. Just like any biological species, right? There's you can't, if you try and control the environment, you're going to get very predictable results that are not the ones that you want, ironically. You're wanting something different. I want to ask you, so one of my questions to people is, what are you good at in conversation? But I think I've got a very good grasp of what you're good at in conversation. What I want to ask you, maybe more uncomfortably, is what are you not so good at in conversation?
Yeah, that's another very, very good question. I think one of the things that I have a hard time dealing with, one of the aspects, is dealing with situations where I cannot be open or fully honest for whatever reason, or people who are purposely not honest about something. Having to establish another layer on top of my conversation, on top of my communication, is something that is a bit mentally difficult for me. It is, unfortunately, at times needed, but it is also something that, I'm trying to understand a bit better from an angle of, if we actually need to have a conversation, but we cannot be honest with each other, how do we approach that conversation? It's a really, really interesting concept as well for me, from a most like theoretical point of view. Is like, how do we actually approach a conversation when we cannot be honest with each other? And that's something that, as I said, I'm trying to improve on, but that certainly is something that doesn't come natural to me. Which, again, back to my point about growth mindset, even if something does not come natural to any of us, we can make progress. Maybe we won't become like the best in the world, but we can certainly become as good as we need to be. So that's how I'm trying to approach that weak area of my conversations.
How do you know that someone is being deceitful?
So that's, I guess, it's hard to know, of course. Sometimes you actually don't know, or you can know. It's obviously easier if you've known that person for a bit, or you're in a certain situation that obviously fosters that idea of potentially having to be deceitful. To answer your question, Sehaam, you actually don't know. And that's why probably I tend to default to sort of being open and really trying to sort of change the situation and make the situation better with every conversation. But sometimes you just know, in a way. Like, one of the things that I think can do well is read people and know when they're purposely trying to be deceitful, as you say. But as you say, there is no good way to do it. It's just Like that's why I tend to err on the side of being honest and transformative in my conversations. But it's really, really hard to actually know when you can't be honest and you can't disclose certain things or certain aspects or personality traits of yourself.
Let me make sure I've understood this, because there's a few different aspects to deceit, right? There's knowing or having a feeling that someone isn't being open and transparent with you versus there's some information I have and I can't share that with you. Is it the first scenario that's more of a challenge to you?
I think it's definitely the first. So is it the second one when someone can't share something that's totally okay, and it can be in a personal discussion, it can be in a negotiation. I mean that happens, and that's part of life. But I guess the first one is when someone is sort of purposely trying to mislead me or lying about something. That's not something that you cannot protect yourself against, other than just not engaging in a conversation, which is always an option, of course. But that is hard to really deal with, because again, like one of the few tools that you have is like, I actually don't want to talk to you.
Well, it's fascinating, because I think what you bring up is a really difficult one for most of us, because I think most of us know when we're being lied to, or when there's something not quite right, absolutely, at the very least. And because our bodies leak, all the signs. We may very carefully craft our words and what we say, but our body gives us away most of the time. And what I find fascinating about that is that anyone who does use that as a way of being or interacting with people is unaware that people do know and are reading the signals correctly. What we might not have is the language to be able to articulate it and say what's just happened. And the other piece that I find happens for us is we're taken aback, we're surprised, we're a little bit shocked because it was not what we were expecting. It didn't meet, our anticipation of it. And so most of us do exactly that, is withdraw from the conversation. And it feels counterintuitive to actually inquire more and stay with the conversation when you feel like you're being deceived and lied to. Why would you do that to me? There's so many mixed emotions that go on in that millisecond of registering that you've just been lied to.
And as you say, body language gives us away. Like we cannot hide when we're lying, or it's very, very difficult to hide when we're lying. And it's just, as you say, like I know I'm being lied to. It's like how do I deal with this? And obviously dealing with those situations is actually very hard, because what do? Do you confront that person? Do you just walk away? Do you excuse yourself? It's difficult. It's difficult to deal with those with those scenarios.
And can you come back to it later? I mean, sometimes that's the other piece, is we feel like, well, the moment was past for me to say anything. But that really taints the relationship from that point on, because you feel taken advantage of, you feel, manipulated and so on. And those are not people I certainly want to work with.
Yes.
But I think the challenge there is to stay with it and ask more probing questions, and be curious as to why is this deception happening, rather than take it as a personal affront.
That's a great tip. For example, that's something I'll start using more and more. That's something that I try to understand what the core of the situation is, because obviously we all lie for a reason. So like we're trying to lie on purpose, at least most of the time. So there must be something going on. And as you say, like asking questions, open-ended questions tends to be a good way of dealing with that. It's like, and that's what I try to do, try to understand what the underlying issue is about that person lying. And then obviously there's always a way forward, right? So if that person is willing to disclose or be honest about something, then, or ask for help, then I'll be the first to really jump in and figure things out. But yeah, I guess that needs to happen, as you say. Like, you just need to ask questions to peel the onion in a way.
Right. Well, a lot of us lie. We do it in small ways to protect people, our reputation. It's the bigger lies that are the hardest. You can understand someone doing it to protect their self-image or to protect their team, or you can rationalize those. It's when there is an injustice, or there's an imbalance, or there's something unethical, or that it becomes a really tricky space to navigate, for sure. Lorenzo, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. It's been lovely chatting to you. I've got one final question for you, which is, what would you like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, thanks, Sehaam. It's been great to have the opportunity to discuss conversations with you. I think if I were to give listeners one piece of advice, it would be to approach conversations in a way that transform others. As I said, to me, the core concept of conversations is to understand each other and have the opportunity to really transform someone. And obviously, when I say transform, this can feel like a bit too ambitious, but it's just about just ask someone about what's something that you've always wanted to do that you've never done for whatever reason, and try to understand or ask probing questions like, why was that? Why don't you try this? Have you thought about this? Like, help that person lower that mental barrier that is sitting in between them really doing something they've always wanted to do. And it can be just a baby step. Of course, we cannot go from 0 to 100 overnight. But if we just help a person take one step they've always wanted to take, but they've never dared to take, that's a huge win for that person. And it'll go a long way. And I think there are very few things that are more rewarding than someone telling you that you've changed them. And that's something that conversations allow us to do. So yes, my advice would be try and transform someone.
Wonderful. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Better Conversations with me, Sehaam Cyrene. And if you did, leaving me a lovely review and rating on Apple Podcast will help me reach more listeners who want to have better conversations at work and in their private lives. You can check out show notes at betterconversations.co/podcast. If you're a regular subscriber, brilliant, lovely to have you back. And if this is your first time, hit subscribe, leave a review and tell a friend. A screenshot and an Instagram story would be going above and beyond, and I would be very grateful. Please tag me at Sehaam Cyrene, all one word, SEHAAMCYRENE. And of course, I'll tag you right back. So, what would you like to hear my future guests and I talk about? Or perhaps you would like to be my guest because you've got a strong point of view that you'd like to share or kick about with me on the podcast. Drop me a note, podcast@betterconversations.co. I'd love to hear from you. And if you are a leader who knows you could achieve so much more in your career and be way more influential by having better conversations and stronger relationships, then do consider enrolling for my 12-week online course, Leaders Who Coach. You'll find the curriculum, videos, and a whole load more at leaderswhocoach.today. Thanks for listening. I'm Sehaam Cyrene, and this has been A Better Conversation.